Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we'll take a quick look at the Gestalt psychology and how it's related to visualization. The reason we want to understand the Gestalt psychology is because now we're moving on to stage 2 about cognitive processing. So that's more manual, so we can incorporate our experience and so on. The Gestalt psychology started in early 1900s. And the goal was to understand how people make sense of a seemingly chaotic world, and how do we discover patterns and so on. So Gestalt is a German word, so pardon my German. And what it means is that about seeing the whole world picture all at once. So that means how do we perceive things in collection instead of a collection of parts. And the psychology principle identify 8 laws of grouping. And they are grouping by proximity, similarity, closure, symmetry, common fate, continuity, good gestalt, and past experience. So what does that mean? So we'll go through each one. And we'll start with proximity. What you will see next are a few illustrations. So let's start with the first one. How many groups are there? So there are a lot of dots, but if you're grouping things by proximity, you probably say there are 4 of them. Because based on the spacing between these groups of dots, you'll say, there's 1 square and then 3 rectangle. So that's the first principle in Gestalt psychology. Well, people like to group things if they're close together. How many groups are there? In this case, you probably would say there are 2 of them. There are different ways to explain this. You can say, well, there's probably 6 groups, right? 1 white, 1 black, and then white, black, and so on. Or you can say they're probably based on the color. So all the white dots are 1 group, all the black dots are another. So this kind of grouping is what we call grouping by similarity. So we try to identify what are the common things in the dots, and then we'll think about them as 1 group. How many shapes are there? So despite there are some broken segments in these 2 shapes here, one is a circle, one is a rectangle, human beings are really good at completing all these missing parts. So what that means is that we can understand things by doing closure. So we like to close things together. If some missing small parts, we're very good at completing them. How many items are there? You probably agree there are 3 of them. And the reason that we can spot out there are 3 is because people like symmetry. So they like things that are mirror images. So first one you can say is a parentheses and brackets and so on. How many sets are there? So that's an animation of some dots moving. And one set of dots are moving towards the right, and the other moving toward the left. And why would I say that? The main reason is because people are very good at spotting continuity. So in other words, common fate. So we see 1 group of dots having the fate of going to the top right, and then the other group going to the top left. How many objects are there? You likely would say that there are 2 keys. But if you really analyze it more closely, you will see that the key on the left is actually overlapped or behind the first key to the right. And the reason that people can really say there are 2 keys instead of saying there's 1 key and then there's some key fragments, is because people like continuity. So we like things that would continue to go along instead of saying, there's some broken pieces. So we like to make things more smooth, more continuous. How many objects are there? So this is an interesting one, because here we interpret these images by actually negative space. For example, in figure 1 here, we don't really have a triangle here, but instead we have 3 dots, and each of them has like a small cutout. And together, we imagine there is a triangle. And similarly, in C, we'll see a maze, even though there's no sphere in the middle, and we only saw some spikes. And similarly for D, we expect to see that this is probably like a snake, maybe on top of some water, even though we don't see most of the parts of the snake bodies. So this is what we call a good gestalt. So that means it just look right. Like people say, so it has to be a triangle, it has to be a sphere there, or there has to be some plane cutting through this nick. And what is this word? For most of you will say, well, flight, right? How hard can it be? But if you really look closer, you might see that, well, L and U are actually really close. I could have interpreted it as a U, right? But then you also know from past experience that F-U-G-H-T, that's not really a word. So you're actually using your knowledge to interpret this word. So that means when we're looking at things, we are actually using our past experience or our memory. In this video, we look at the 8 laws of grouping in Gestalt psychology, which can be a good way to explain how we perceive and make sense of the world.